Welcome to the global discussion. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the work redesign moment that we're all living through. And I want to phrase it with the statement that AI probably isn't a tool upgrade, although some people maybe think that it is. What we actually have is a work redesign moment. Let me expand on that for you in today's episode. Every new system, every new platform, every transformation deck came with the same assurance. This will make you feel more productive. This will make you be more productive. And yet, most people I know feel busier, not necessarily better. They feel faster, not necessarily freer, more measured, but not really more effective. Now, AI is different. It's different not because it's smarter, but because for the first time, it's confronting a truth that we've quietly ignored. A lot of modern work may not have been as real as we thought to begin with. So, what do I mean by that? Well, I think that's why the conversation around AI feels so charged at the moment. It's not just about efficiency or output, it's about exposure. AI is showing us in very practical ways where human effort was probably being wasted or padded or maybe even politely performed. Once you see that, it becomes hard to unsee that. So, productivity was never really about working faster. And most organizations still treat productivity as purely a matter of speed, how quickly something gets done, how many tasks can be cleared, or how many hours are used. But I suppose the lived experience of work, it sometimes tells a different story. Many people spend their days translating ideas into formats, moving information between tools, rewording the same thinking for a different audience, and preparing updates that exist sometimes mainly to prove that work is actually happening. So AI does not just accelerate these type of activities, maybe it begins to question them a little bit. So when we have a tool that can now summarize a meeting in seconds, you start asking why the meeting needed to exist in that form. When a model can generate a first draft instantly, you wonder why someone needed 3 days to get started. And when analysis that once took weeks can be completed in minutes, the bottleneck is no longer execution, it's judgment. And this is where productivity may become more uncomfortable because the constraint was never human capability, it was how work was designed. And what's the data really saying? Well, recent reporting focuses a lot on productivity uplifts, the percentage gains, the time saved, output increased. And on the surface, this looks like the usual technology narrative, just with perhaps better numbers. But if we look closer, the pattern is more interesting. The biggest gains are not happening where work was already optimized. They are happening where work was somewhat bloated, roles heavy on coordination, reporting, synthesis, and maybe internal translation are seeing the most dramatic shifts. That tells us something important. AI, it's not replacing deep expertise at this point. It's compressing the middle layer of performative labor, that labor that sits between the thinking and the doing. Tools from organizations like Microsoft and Google and OpenAI, they're already embedded in everyday workflows, whether that's writing, analysis, planning, research, even basic decision framing. They're no longer these standalone tasks. They're becoming these ambient capabilities. And the result is not that people suddenly work harder. It is that fewer steps are possibly required to get to something useful. Now, that's a very different kind of productivity I would offer. And this can feel a little threatening. When a system can do in seconds what once justified maybe a full role, it forces and somewhat demands a recalibration. And not everyone is comfortable with that. And I can understand why. Change always feels personal when it touches how we earn our place. But I don't think the real risk is job loss in such a dramatic case that's being presented. The bigger risk might actually be clinging on to outdated definitions of value. Because AI is not asking whether your work is hard, it's asking whether your work matters. And there's a shift, isn't there, from output to impact. And this is probably where I think many leaders might be getting it a little bit wrong. You see, they see AI productivity gains and immediately reach for the headcount math. If you can do more with less, then less must be the answer. This is, I would offer short-term reading. The more strategic question is, if we remove the friction, what could our people focus on? Judgment, taste, context, relationship, strategy, creativity, ethics. These are not slogans. They are the things machines still struggle with because they are shaped by experience, intuition, and accountability. In teams where AI is used well, I see fewer presentations and maybe more conversations, fewer drafts and more decisions, less time spent proving work and more time spent improving it. That's not about efficiency. That's more about effectiveness. Knowledge work is certainly being repriced. There's an uncomfortable economic reality underneath all of this. And that's because for decades, knowledge work was priced somewhat based on scarcity, access to information, the ability to synthesize, time required to produce outputs. And AI collapses those assumptions. When information is abundant and synthesis is somewhat cheap, the premium moves elsewhere. Where does it move to? Well, it moves to insight. It moves to discernment, to knowing what not to do, to understanding nuance and consequence. And this is why maybe the junior roles might feel the most pressure. Early career work has traditionally focused on learning through execution. AI compresses the learning curve by removing much of that execution. That does not mean opportunity disappears, but it does mean we need to rethink how capability is built. Apprenticeship models, shadowing, decision participation, these probably matter more now, not less. Managers will probably be the real bottleneck. And one quiet truth that's emerging from AI adoption is that technology isn't really the limiting factor. It might be the management. And teams adopt tools quickly. Individuals, I think, experiment fairly eagerly. But organizational productivity stalls or can stall when leaders insist on old processes layered on top of new capabilities. for example, weekly reports that nobody reads, approval chains that were designed for much slower cycles, meetings held out of habit rather than a need. And AI exposes managerial drag in a way that nothing else has. If a team can produce high quality analysis in hours, but then finds itself waiting weeks for sign off, that productivity gain somewhat evaporates. And if people save time, but are not given the autonomy to reinvest it, don't be surprised if they disengage. The future of productivity, therefore, is probably not about tools, it's more about trust. So just from a personal perspective, I've noticed something subtle in teams that genuinely benefit from artificial intelligence. And that is that they sound calmer, maybe not quieter, maybe not slower, but maybe a little less frantic. There's less scrambling to prepare. There's less anxiety about being caught unready, and definitely less performative busyness. When the baseline work is easier, people can show up differently. They can ask better questions. They can challenge assumptions. And importantly, they take pauses. Now, that to me is probably one of the more compelling signals that productivity, it's not just higher output, it has potentially a lower cognitive load while delivering the same or better results. And we rarely measure that or think about that, but maybe we should. People get focused on the risk of missing the moment. There's a temptation to treat AI as just another tool rollout. Training sessions, usage targets, policy documents, all necessary, but maybe not enough, maybe a little insufficient. This moment in time, it feels bigger than that. And AI is giving organizations permission to redesign work, to strip out what never made sense in the first place, to be honest about what's adding value and what's simply filling time or making things longer than they need to be. And if leaders do not take that opportunity, the productivity gains will plateau regardless of the technology. Not because AI fails, but because maybe imagination does. And there's an irony in that, the irony that the technology will be blamed for a human failure of courage. AI reveals more where effort was misallocated, where processes existed to manage anxiety rather than outcomes, and where intelligence was maybe buried under ritual. Handled well, I'm pretty optimistic. I think AI-driven productivity gains, they don't have to diminish humanity at work. They should actually create space for more of it. And the question whether we're willing to let go of old performances and step into that new space, I think that's where the real test lies ahead. Thank you for joining me here on the Global Discussion. Like, follow, subscribe, and I hope to see you back here for some more discussions. Thank you.